Yo, what's going on, guys? Tactical Cereal, welcome back to another Brawl Stars video. Today, we're going to be doing the best build for all 78 Brawlers and Brawl Stars, but for only Solo Showdown. So if you're looking for a best build for 3v3 or competitive, this ain't the video I'd click off. This is for only Solo Showdown players, because I feel like nobody does this. I haven't looked it up, but I play a lot of Solo Showdown. I have in total 7,326 solo wins, and that's only for first place. That only counts for first place. So, I feel like I play a lot of Solo Showdown to the point where I can do the best build for every brawler for Solo Showdown. It'll be Gadget, Star Power, and then Gears for recommendation. I'm not really going to talk about Hypercharge, because the thing about Solo Showdown is you really don't get your Hypercharge that often. So, I don't think I'm going to talk about Hypercharge. Maybe if you want, let me know in the comments. I can just do a quick little thing of what Hypercharge I would buy for Solo Showdown and which ones I wouldn't buy. But like I said, you almost never get your Hypercharge in Solo Showdown because it's just so, like, there's not a lot of fighting most of the time because you'll end up dying. But yeah, without further ado, let's talk about the best build for all 78 Brawlers. We're just going to go by rarity, so starting off with Shelly, going all the way down to Kit. So Shelly, a brawler that's very popular in Solo Showdown. You want to be using Clay Pigeons 100% of the time. And then for Star Powers, it depends on the Shelly player you are. I would say 99.9% of the time, you're going to use Band-Aid because you want the survivability. Don't think you're going to get crazy value out of Shell Shock, but Shell Shock does pair very well with Clay Pigeons. And then for Gears, I use Speed and Damage 100% of the time. You could use the Gadget Gear, but I don't really think you're going to use 4 Clay Pigeons throughout the match. It's possible, but I think Speed and Damage is your safest bet. Next up, we have Nita. Nita's a brawler you really won't play in Solo Showdown, but I'm doing every brawler, so I would say majority of the time I actually would use Bear Paws because the stun, if you get it off, is brutal. And if I use Bear Paws, I'm going to use Hyper Rear because that combination is good. But if you want to use the other combination, you can use Faux Fur and then Bear With Me. That's also a good combination. And then for Gears, I never switch away from the speed and the damage with Nita. Next up, we have Colt. And I use Colt purely for damage, so I use Speed Loader 100% of the time. Maybe if you want to open up the map, you can use Silver Bullet, but you can just do that with your Super. And then I actually use Magnum Special 100% of the time because I'm such a bad Colt player. But if you're a good Colt player and know how to hit shots without Magnum Special, then you can definitely use Slick Boots because it's an increased movement speed, which is helpful. And then I never switch away from the damage or the reload. You could go for the shield gear because, you know, survivability is important, but like I said, I use Colt just for pure damage. Next up, we have Bull. I use Stomper almost 100% of the time. The only time I'd use T-Bone Injector is on a very grassy map where I know I'm not going to get much value out of my Super. And then for Star Powers, Tough Guy, 100% of the time. Survivability is key. And then I use Speed and Supercharge gear because Bull's Super is very strong, paired with Stomper. But you could go for damage and health as well. I don't really think you need the extra gadget gear. You definitely don't need vision, and you don't need shield. So for me, I think speed and supercharge is your best bet. Moving on to Brock, a brawler that's decent in Solo Showdown. So you want to use Rocket Laces 100% of the time. You're not going to get value out of Rocket Fuel because you need to, if anything aggressive goes over to you and you don't have Rocket Laces, you're going to die. You don't have the DPS. And then I actually use Rocket number 4 almost 100% of the time as well because I'm probably going to get the 4 ammo a lot during Solo Showdown, and also it gives you a better chance at killing anything aggro or a tank because, you know, tanks and aggro is just so popular in Solo Showdown. And I always use the shield and the reload gear. You could go for the damage gear, but I feel like the reload gear is better because it helps you spam out more shots, but you definitely need the shield gear because Brock he's a squishy brawler. Moving on to Primo. Primo is a brawler that's very popular in Solo Showdown, so this one's kind of easy. I use Suplex Supplement 100% of the time. And I think depends, personal preference. I think El Fuego I'd use 99.9% of the time because I don't really think you need the extra speed boost. You just want the damage. And then Supercharge and Speed is very helpful, but you could go for the health or the damage, just like Bull. Next up, we have Barley, another brawler that kind of sucks right now in Solo Showdown because there's too much aggro, but Sticky Syrup Mixer 100% of the time. And then I actually use medical use more often than not. I like Extra Gnosis, but the healing is really nice with Barley, and it's hard to stay alive. And then for the gears, I never switch away from the damage and shield. You could go extra gadget for stickies, but I don't think you're going to use 4 in a match. Next up, we have Poco, a brawler that's easy. Tuning Fork 100% of the time, Screeching Solo 100% of the time, and I never switch away from the damage and the shield. And then last on the rares, we have Rosa. I think depending on the map, if there's some key spots you want to put grass on, you can use Grow Light. But if the map already has a lot of grass, you can use Unfriendly Bushes. I would say majority of the time, I use Plant Life just for extra survivability. But like I said, if there's not a lot of grass and you just, I don't know, want to just sit in a bush the whole game and abuse your super, then I guess you can go Thorny Gloves. But I think Plant Life is a safer option. And then I never switch away from these gears. The only time maybe I would consider the gadget gear is if you want 4 Grow Lights, but I don't really think you're going to need 4 Grow Lights, and you definitely don't need 4 Unfriendly Bushes. Moving on to the rare Brawlers, starting off with Jessie, a Brawler that you should never play in Solo Showdown, but if you're going to, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. Spark Plug 100% of the time, Energize 100% of the time, and then for the gears, I would just say I would go damage and shield. I really don't think you need pet power. The only time I play Jessie is in Heist, but this is Solo Showdown, so for me, just use the shield star power, gear. Moving on to Dynamite, a very popular brawler too, the very popular thrower, even though throwers are not good. Satchel Charge 100% of the time, Demolition 100% of the time. If you want to use Dyna Jump, go ahead, but you're just trolling at that point, and then I never switch away from this. The only time is maybe I would switch to the shield gear, but I like having 4 Satchel Charges. Next up, we have Tick, another brawler you should never play in Solo Showdown, but if you do, go ahead. Last Hurrah 100% of the time, Well Oiled 100% of the time, and then I never switch away from these gears, ever, ever. If anybody tells you, oh, the health gear is good on Tick, or even the vision gear, blah, 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 no. It's Shield and the Mythic gear are the only 2 gears usable on Tick. Health gear is garbage on Tick, because, oh yeah, he gets benefited from Well. No, he doesn't! Moving on to 8-Bit. 8-Bit is an interesting one because I tend to switch up the build a lot with 8-Bit. I would say majority of the time I use Cheat Cartridge because I just want to teleport back. I don't think I get much value out of extra credits. And then for star powers, I use Plugged In most of the time because of that speed boost, but you could go for Boosted Booster. And then depending on the gears, it also depends on which star power. If you run Boosted Booster, use the speed gear because 8-Bit's slow. If you are running Plugged In, though, I just go for the damage and the reload. Next up, we have Rico, a very flexible brawler, but in terms of gadgets, a multiple launcher, basically 100% of the time. The reason is it just deletes anything aggro. You really won't get much value out of Bouncy Castle because, like, once you activate it, you're going to die regardless if there's an aggro on you. Even if you use this, you don't have the DPS. And then for star powers, if it's a very, very, very wall of favored map, I use Super Bouncy. If it's an open map, I use Rogue Retreat. I think overall Super Bouncy is better because you only play Rico on Cavern Churn. And then for gears, there's a lot of gears I like, but I don't really use the reload gear. I just go for damage and shield or speed and damage. So it's up to you, but I think the safest is definitely damage and shield. Next up, we have Daryl, a brawler that's okay, I guess, in Solo Showdown, but isn't the greatest. I use Tarbell 100% of the time. Both of his gadgets are garbage, so it doesn't really matter. And then Steel Hoops 100% of the time, and then I never switch away from these gears. I really don't think you need the speed on Daryl. Next up, we have Penny, a brawler that you should also never play in Solo Showdown, but I play her all the time in Solo Showdown. Salty Barrel 100% of the time. And then I use Master Blaster 100% of the time because it knocks back aggros, and I don't really think you get much value out of this star power anymore. And then I never switch away from damage and shield. Next up, we have Carl. I think it used to be Flying Hook, but I think since the buff, I've seen a lot of people use Heat Ejector. I still think the safer option is going to be Flying Hook because it's your getaway device, or it's your aggro play if you want to kill somebody with your super. Protects your pirouette 100% of the time, and then I never switch away from this build. Next up, we have Jackie. A pretty easy one. Pneumatic Booster 100% of the time. Counter Crusher 100% of the time. Don't think you really need extra HP because it's better to get more damage output and confirm a kill easier. And then I never really switch away. You could go extra gadget gear if you want for pneumatic boosters, but I think this is the safest build. Next, and then lastly, for the super rares, we have Gus, Cookie Popper 100% of the time, Spirit Animal 100% of the time. Then I never switch away from these gears right here. You will definitely not get 4 Cookie Poppers in a Solo Showdown game. So, don't buy the gadget gear. Moving on to the Epic Brawlers, starting off with Bo. I use Super Totem 100% of the time. It's good for tanking a shot. You're not going to get really any value out of Tripwire. Maybe, but I prefer an extra tanky shot. Snare Bear 100% of the time, unless you're playing Cavern Churn or Island Invasion, where you want to use Circling Eagle for sure. And then for gears, I like this build a lot because I only play Bow on Cavern Churn and Island Invasion. I don't really play him on any other Showdown map, but if you're playing him on a Showdown map that is not Cavern Churn or Island Invasion, I think damage and shield is probably your best safest spot, or you can go damage and reload. But I think speed just pairs really well with Bow on Cavern Churn and Island Invasion because he'd be zooming around the map. Next up we have Ems, very easy one in my opinion. Friend Zoner 100% of the time, and then I use Bad Karma 100% of the time because the damage is insane once she ramps up in power cubes, which is not hard for Ems to do. I never switch away from the speed and damage. The only time maybe I would consider a different gear is extra gadget gear if you know you're going to use 4 Friend Zoners, but it's up to you. Next up we have Stu. I use Breakthrough 100% of the time in Showdown. It's better to be aggressive than to be passive with Stu in Showdown because he counters a lot of the Showdown Brawlers. You could go Speed Zone if you want to tank a shot or if you just want to be a little bit faster in a certain spot, but I feel like it's going to get destroyed easily. And then I use Zero Drag actually more often than Gasso Heal. The only reason is there's so much aggression and so many tanks that you need to get away with your super more than you need to play aggressive. You can play a little bit of both with Zero Drag. But if you are a skilled Stu player and know how to use Gas Heal, use that one. Not going to stop you. And then I use damage and shield 100% of the time. Next up we have Piper. Auto Aimer 100% of the time. Snappy Sniping 100% of the time. And then I never switch away from the damage and the shield. Next up we have Pam. Scrap Sucker 100% of the time. And then for star powers, they both kind of suck, I won't lie. I think it depends on what Pam player you are. If you prefer the healing, go Mama's Hug. If you prefer the extra damage, go Mama's Squeeze. They both suck. And then I use damage and shield. You could go extra gadget gear, you could go health gear, you could go vision gear. Honestly, all of them except for the speed and the vision, or the shield gear, are pretty good on Pam. But I think the safest one is just the mythic gear and the damage gear. Next up we have Big Chungus. Frank, I use Irresistible Attraction 100% of the time. I never get value from this. And then I use Sponge 100% of the time. I never get a kill with Frank, so no point in Power Gram. And I never switch off of this. Moving on to BB, I use Vitamin Booster 100% of the time. This gadget is so garbage, it literally ruins her Hypercharge. I use Batting Stance more often than Home Run. I think it just depends on the gears. If you use Home Run, go Damage Shield. If you use Batting Stance, go Speed Damage. Next up we have B. Another easy one. I use Honey Molasses 100% of the time. I don't really give much value out of Rattled Hive and Showdown. And then for star powers, I'm a decent B, so I use Honeycomb 100% of the time because I don't really miss the 3K shot that often. And then for gears, you just damage and shield is the safest option. Next up is my favorite brawler, Nani, and I use Return to Sender 100% of the time. I use Tempered Steel 100% of the time. I don't really think you need to teleport with Nani. I just prefer just to tank a sharpshooter shot or even anything because it gives her a little more survivability. And I never get that autofocus because the only time I'll use super is anything aggressive. And then I always switch between the gears. I think the most common one I use actually is the shield and the extra gadget gear. But I don't really think you need the supercharge with Nani and Showdown. And then I don't really find great value in the damage gear. Like, I know she does a lot of damage, but I feel like she deals enough damage that where she doesn't need the damage gear. And I prefer the extra gadget gear against the sharpshooters. But I mean, you could go this build if you want as well. I like this one better, though, because that 4th Return to Sender sometimes is very beneficial for myself. Next up, we have Edgar. Depending on what kind of Edgar you play, I think Hardcore is going to be the better gadget overall because it gives you the survivability. But Let's Fly also pairs really well with his Hypercharge still. And then for star powers, I think it also depends on the Edgar. If you want the extra healing, I go Fisticuffs. If you want the extra damage, you can go Hard Landing. I would say majority of the time I use Fisticuffs. And then for gears, I mean, all of them really, except for the health and the vision gear, are really good on Edgar. I like the speed gear, I like the supercharge gear, but I think the safest option is just going to be the damage and the shield gear. But I like the supercharge and the extra gadget gear still. Next up we have Griff, Piggy Bank, 100% of the time. Unless you don't want to open up walls at all, then you can use Coin Shower, but this gadget is literally just walking uselessness. And then for star powers, might surprise you, I use Keep the Change almost all the time. The only reason is I use Griff just to completely delete anything aggressive. Like, Business Resilience is the better star power overall, but I just want to delete anybody that gets up into my face. That's why I use Keep the Change. And then I never switch away from this build right here. Next up we have Grom, another brawler you should never, ever, ever play in solo showdown. But I would say I use Radio Check almost 100% of the time. The only time I'd use Rock Shower is on Cavern Churn. And then for Star powers, X Factor 100% of the time. Don't use this one ever. It's trash. And then I never switch away from the gears, damage, and shield. Next up we have Bonnie, a brawler that recently got a buff to her damage and her supercharge rate. So I use Sugar Rush 100% of the time, and then I use Black Powder 100% of the time. The other gadget and star power are one of the worst in the game. And then for gears, it's kind of changed. I used to run the speed and the damage all the time, but now I run the extra gadget and the supercharge, because now it only takes 3 hits to get Bonnie's super with the supercharge gear, which I think is actually super broken. Next up we have Gale, Twister 100% of the time, and then Freezing Snow. I would say 90% of the time. You could still get value out of Blustery Blow because it does counter his counters, but I think it's just better to use Freezing Snow, and then I use damage and shield 100% of the time. Next up we have Colette, Gotcha 100% of the time. I think I use Push It 90% of the time because it pushes tanks and anything aggressive out of Colette's space, but I know it can be vulnerable when she's going back to get killed, but I think it's just a safer one. It also confirms you're going to hit at least both of the shots. Max Attacks, though, is still a good star power as well. I think it's just better. And then I use shield or gadget gear, damage and shield most of the time. I just bought the gadget gear, though, because I think it just pairs with 4 gotcha gadgets. This gadget, I don't know how it didn't get nerfed, but it needs to get nerfed. So if you expect a nerf to that gadget soon, then you can go damage and shield. But I think damage and extra gadget gear, or shield and extra gadget gear, whatever. Between these 3 gadgets, it's up to you. Next up, we have Belle. And it's going to be Nest Egg 100% of the time. You really don't need to be flashy with reverse polarity. And then for star powers, positive speed feedback 100% of the time. And then gears, I think gadget or reload and shield is better instead of damage and reload. But I think you need a shield gear because Belle, she doesn't have a lot of HP. Next up we have Ash, Chill Pill 100% of the time. First Bash 100% of the time. I never switch away from the damage and the speed gear. Next up we have Lola. I use Freeze Frame 100% of the time, Improvise 100% of the time, and I think a lot of the gears are good with Lola. I never switch away from this build, but you could go with the speed, you could go with the vision gear as well. Next up we have Sam, a brawler that I've started to see a little bit more in Showdown, but still isn't a great brawler. Magnetic Field 100% of the time, Hardy Recovery 1000% of the time, and then I never switch away from the damage and the shield. Next up we have Mandy. I use Caramelize 100% of the time because anything aggro gets slowed down and gives Mandy at least a chance. In my sights 100% of the time, and then the damage and the shield gear 100% of the time. Next up we have Maisie, Disengage 100% of the time, Tremors 100% of the time, and then I use damage and extra gadget gear. I feel like with Maisie I always use 4 disengages because not only does it pair very well with her super, but it also is a good counter to aggro because of the stun. Next up we have Hank, a walking super feeder. Barricade 100% of the time. It's going to blow 100% of the time, and I never switch away from the damage and the health gear. Next up we have Pearl, Overcooked 100% of the time, and then I use Heat Shield 100% of the time. The only time maybe you can use the star power is if you know you're going against a lot of aggro, and you're going to need your super to defend yourself. But just use the shield, the star power, because it gives you extra tankiness, and Pearl already just melts anybody, so... And then I use damage and vision, but you could go for the shield gear, you could go for the extra gadget gear. You can go for any gear on Pearl, I'm going to be honest. They're all really good with her. And then we have Larry and Laurie, Order Fallback 100% of the time, Protocol Protect 100% of the time. I don't really see much value in this star power anymore. And then damage and shield is the safest option. You could go extra gadget gear, but I feel like Larry and Laurie damage is a little bit not as strong as it used to be. It's still really strong, but that damage gear makes it even stronger. And then shield gear gives them a little bit of more survivability. And then finally in the epics we have Angela, the newest brawler, Stinging Flight 100% of the time, and then I use Empower 99.9% of the time. Maybe on a super watery map like Acid Lakes, you can use Flow, but I feel like the healing just pairs really well with Angelo, and I never switch off of these gears. Moving on to the Mythic brawlers, starting off with Mortis. I use Survival Shovel 100% of the time. I don't really see the point in this one because this one gives Mortis extra supercharge rate. I actually use Coiled Snake 100% of the time. I know Creepy Harvest seems like a good star power, but I need that long dash with Mortis to escape or just be an assassin like what he is. I'm a terrible Mortis, so They also never switch off of these gears. Moving on to Terra, I use support from Brown 100% of the time, and I think it just depends on personal preference. If you want the healing, go Healing Shade. If you want just another ammo waster, use Black Porter, but I think the safer option is Healing Shade. And then for gears, speed and damage is the safest. You could go extra gadget gear over the damage gear, but I feel like the speed gear is essential for Terra. Next up, we have Jean. Lamp Blowout 100% of the time. You're not going to get much value out of the Vengeful Spirits. There's too much aggression, and then it also knocks them back and gives Jean a little bit of HP. Obviously, Spirit Slap 100% of the time because you can't get any value out of Magic Puffs. And I think the safest one is just to go Vision. And then the Mythic gear, I don't really think you need the damage. Don't think you need the shield. Don't think you need the health. Don't really think you need 4 Lamp Blowouts. And the other one is Speed, but I'd rather have the Speed over the Vision gear, or the Vision gear over the Speed gear. Next up, we have Max. Phase Shifter 100% of the time. Star Power is personal preference. If you want more supers, Supercharge is better. If you want more attack, Run and Gun is better. I think the safer one overall is going to be Run and Gun. And then for gears, literally all of them, honestly, even the Gadget gear and the Vision gear, they all work with Max. But I think the safe is just Damage and Shield. Next up, we have Mr. P. I use Portal Reinforcements almost all the time. I really never get Mr. P Super in Showdown, so I don't really think you're going to get much value out of Service Bell. You can, but I feel like everything either is a tank or pierces. And then I use Revolving Door 100% of the time. Gives more HP to the porters, and it makes it a little bit harder to deal with. I don't really get much value out of this Star Power. Maybe you can use it if you want the extra damage, but I feel like it's a little bit hard to hit the second bounce, and it's every 4 seconds. I think maybe this one's a better Star Power, but I use this one almost all the time. And I never switch away from these gears. Next up, you have Sprout. I think the way you play Sprout is you could go with the Garden Moisture for the Photosynthesis, but that combination is really not that great right now. So I think Overgrowth and Transplant is going to be used 100% of the time. And then I use the Supercharge gear 100% of the time and the Shield gear 100% of the time. I don't really get much value out of the damage gear. Next up, we have Byron. I use Booster Shots 100% of the time. Anything aggressive, and now Byron can somewhat deal with them because of the same damage. This one's okay, but I think this one's a safer option. And then I use Malaise 100% of the time. That healing is brutal, and then I never switch away from the damage and the shield. Next up, we have Squeak. Residue 100% of the time, and then Chain Reaction I use 100% of the time. The extra damage with Squeak helps him out in Showdown a lot. And then you could go extra Gadget gear, but I feel like you don't really need 4 residues, so just damage and shield is the safest option. Next up, you have Lou. Syro Syrup 100% of the time, Hypothermia 100% of the time, and then I never switch away from these 2 gears right here. Next up, you have Colonel Ruffs. Take Cover 100% of the time. I don't really think you're going to need this because you need the protection with Ruffs. And then Air Superiority 100% of the time. You get no value out of Field Promotion, and then I never switch away from these gears. Next up, we have Buzz. Depending on the map, I would say majority of the time you're going to use Reserve Buoy, but on a map like Cavern Churn, Island Invasion, or if a map with a lot of bushies, use X-Ray Shade. Feast or Famine is another good one because you can scout the bush and make it a little bit easier, but I would say this one's the safer option. Eye Sharp almost all the time. Maybe on a non-grassy map where you know you're going to get your super and utilize it very well, you could use Tarpon Veto, but Eye Sharp pairs very well with X-Ray Shade, so I think that's the better one overall. And then I never switch away from these gears. You could go Speed gear, but I really like this one right here. Next up, we have Fang. I use Roundhouse Kick 100% of the time. It's good against aggro. It's good at cycling a super. I use Fresh Kicks almost 100% of the time. But I feel like in Showdown, Divine Souls might actually be better because it gives them a little more survivability. But I use Fang's super clearly just for finishing kills. And it's also a good getaway tool. And then I never switch away from these gears. Next up, we have Eve. Gotta go 100% of the time. And then I use Happy Surprise 100% of the time. I find it pretty easy to hit Eve shots, so I don't find any value in this Star Power. And then gears, I never switch away from these 2 gears. It's just a safe option. Next up, we have the baddie, Janet. I use Backstage Pass actually most of the time. The only time I use Drop the Base is if I just want to keep people low. But at the same time, there's a lot of aggro and tanks in Showdown. And if you don't have a super, Backstage Pass at least will save you 3 times. And then Star Powers, I use Vocal Warm-Up 100% of the time. Maybe on Cavern Churn, if you have the balls to play Janet, you can go Stage View. But I feel like Vocal Warm-Up is just essential for Janet. And then the Gears is an interesting one because I think the safest is going to be this one, but I really like Speed on Janet, and Vision also works really well with Janet. But I think the safest is just go to Damage and Shield. Next up, we have Otis. Otis is 100% of the time. Fat Slider, 100% of the time, ink refills, and I never switch away from the damage and the shield. Maybe you can go Supercharged Gear, but I don't really think it's needed on Otis. Next up, we have Buster, Slow-Mo Replay, 100% of the time. Kevlar Vest, 100% of the time. And then you can go Speed, Damage, you can go Damage Extra Gadget, or you can go Speed Extra Gadget, whatever. It doesn't matter. All three of those are really good gears on Buster. Next up, we have Gray, Walking Cane, 100% of the time. And then I use New Perspective 100% of the time. Gives Gray a little more survivability. I don't really think you get much value out of Fake Injury. And then I use Damage and Shield all the time. You could go for Extra Gadget Gear, but I don't really think you're going to need 4 Walking Canes. Next up, we have RT, Hacks 100% of the time. If you're an idiot, then you use Inline, but nobody on my channel is an idiot. Next up, we have the Star Power, Recording. I use 100% of the time. I don't really think you need this, and I'd rather have a Shield. And then for gears, I have this one wrong. Don't use the damage gear. The damage gear on RT actually is trash. I haven't played RT in so long. So just go health and shield, because the damage gear on RT actually doesn't work as well as it should. Next up, we have Willow. I use Dive 100% of the time. Helps just waste enemy ammo if they have they lack brain cells. I use Obsession 100% of the time because most of the time with Willow, it's very tanky, and if you get your super, it'll be a tank or an assassin that just creeps right next to you, and you can't miss a super, and then you just run them into the poison, and then they die, and then I never switch away from these two gears. Next up, we have Doug. I use, well, obviously you have to use Extra Mustard 100% of the time. You get no value from this, and then I use Self-Service 100% of the time, and then I get no value from this, and I never switch away from these gears. Next up, we have Chuck. I use Ghost Train 100% of the time, and then I use Pit Stop 100% of the time. You don't really play Chuck in Showdown, so it's kind of hard. And then I actually really like the health gear on Chuck, but just go Damage and Shield. That's probably your safest option. Next up, we have Charlie. Spiders, 99.9% of the time. The only time you'll use personal space is if you know there's nothing that everything will pierce your spiders, but at the same time, you just want them for pressure. Digestive, 100% of the time, and then I never switch away from these gears. Next up, we have Miko. I use Clipping Scream 100% of the time in Showdown because I really don't think you need Presto with Miko. Plus, you sometimes want the extra damage, and then you might think Record Smash is better, but you need 4 ammo with Miko. So I use Mucky Business almost all the time. If you really just solely want to ramp up on cubes and delete everybody, then you can go with Record Smash. But I just think Mucky Business is essential to play Miko, and I never switch away from the damage and the shield gear. And then lastly on the Mythics, we have the new baddie brawler Melody. Interlude 100% of the time, Fast Beats 100% of the time, and then for the gears, I use the damage and the vision gear on Safety Center, but I think your safest one is going to be the damage and the shield gear. I don't really think you're going to need the speed gear because she has the star power that literally gives you more speed. Moving on to Legendary, starting up with Spike. Life Plant, I would say 90% of the time. If you know you're just going to be chased down by aggro all the time, then you can go with Popping Pincushion, but it's just hard to use. And then for star powers, I would say Curveball 80% of the time. I think Fertilize is actually decent on Solo Showdown because you can heal up. And I feel like since there's so many tanks and aggression, Spike can hit his shots pretty easily. And then I would go, you can either go damage or shield, or you can go shield and extra gadget gear. Or sorry, not extra gadget gear, mythic gear. And then, but I feel like you need the shield with Spike since she's so squishy. And then mythic gear is just really good. Next up we have Crow. Slowing Toxin, I would say, it's 50-50. If you want to slow the opponent, then you can go for it. But I think Defense Booster is a little bit safer because it gives Crow a shield. I use Carry On Crow 100% of the time because I don't really see that much value in Extra Toxic anymore. And Carry On Crow just confirms to delete people once they're low. And then I use Speed and Mythic gear, but another safe one is just to go the shield gear because, you know, Crow is squishy. But I feel like Crow doesn't take that much damage. Next up, you have Leon. I use Clone Protector 100% of the time. The only reason is it's basically, I only use it to tank, and I don't really see a lot of value on Lollipop Drop in Solo Showdown. So, Clone Protector is a little more tanky. And then for star powers, I use Invisible 100% of the time. The only reason is it pairs so well with the Mythic gear and its Hypercharge, and which is not hard to get. You could go Smoke Trails if you want to zoom, but I just think the healing overall is better. And then for gears, you could go Speed Gear, but Mythic Gear 100% of the time, and then Damage Gear is the second safest option. Next up, we have Sandy, Sweet Dreams, 100% of the time. Root Sands, I would say like 95% of the time. It's good at scouting an area and clearing out a whole bush in the center of the map. But if you just want to heal more, you can go Healing Winds, but I think Rune Sands is safer. And I never switch away from the speed or the damage gear. Don't get the Mythic gear on Sandy, it's trash. Next up we have Amber. Dancing Flames, 90% of the time. If you're playing a very open map, then you go with Fire Starters, but Dancing Flames just deletes tanks and aggro. And then Wild Flames, 100% of the time. Reload gear and damage gear, I would say 100% of the time. Vision gear is nice on Amber. I don't really think you need the Mythic gear, but the reload gear is 100% of the time you need. Next up we have Meg. Jolting Boots, 100% of the time you need the healing. And then I see a lot of people use Heavy Metal, and it's annoying as hell, but I actually think that's the better star power because there's so much aggression in Showdown right now. But Force Field is also a safe option, so I would say it's 50-50, depending if you're the map. The more open the map, then you want to use Force Field. If it's a closed map, then you want to use Heavy Metal. And then for star powers, I never switch away from the damage and the shield. You could go with the health gear as well, but I feel like you use Meg just for the pure tankiness. Next up, we have Surge. I use Power Shield 100% of the time. So since there's so many tanks and aggression, it's pretty easy to farm Surge's star power or super. So I don't really think you need this one. Plus, this one gives them a little more survivability and can confirm a kill easier. Obviously, to the max 100% of the time because you get no value out of Surf Ice Cold. And then I never really switch away from these gears. Maybe you can go for the speed gear, but I think Surge, you just need the survivability with him in Showdown. Next up, we have Chester. Chester is an interesting one for gadgets. I think the better one overall is Spicy Dice because if you get the stun super, it's basically a confirmed kill on a tank or an aggro. But you could go Candy Beans if you're really confident on how to use it. Bellomania, 100% of the time. And then speed and damage is your safest one for Chester. Next up, you have Cordelius. Poison Mushroom, 90% of the time. It's good because it kills an enemy, basically, because they can't attack you. Maybe if you know you're not going to get much value out of Poison Mushroom, go Replanting, but I think in Showdown, Poison Mushroom is overall the best one. And then I use Combo Shrooms almost all the time, because the damage ramp up with cubes with Cordelius is insane. Pair that with a Hypercharge, you're just going to delete people. And I use speed and damage all the time. And then lastly, we have Kit. Cardboard Box, 100% of the time, you get no value out of Cheeseburger. Power Hungry, 100% of the time, you get no value out of Overly Attached. And then I use Gacha Gear and Shield 100% of the time. Having 4 cardboard boxes is insane. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time.